Welcome to Open for Business. Mapapanood nyo rin ang programang OFB sa Facebook at YouTube. Mag-like at mag-subscribe sa aming social media at Net25 TV. I am Cesar Vallejos. Welcome to Open for Business. Samahan ninyo kaming tuklasin ng iba't ibang pamamaraan kung paano mapaunlad ang inyong negosyo. Aalamin din natin mula sa mga eksperto ang mga pangunahing trends at mga estratehiya kung paano natin mapapanatili ang negosyo, maliit man o malaki ay maging laging open for business. The majority of Filipinos do not have bank accounts, according to the 2019 Financial Inclusion Survey report of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. The number of unbanked Filipino adults stood at 51.2 million in 2019, or 71% of the total adult population. The survey cited lack of enough money, lack of documentary requirements, and a refusal to open a bank account as some of the main reasons why people remain unbanked. But has the situation changed since the start of the pandemic, especially now with the growing popularity of digital banks? Are more Filipinos engaging in banking online? In this episode, we will tackle those questions as we discuss the future of digital banking in the Philippines with our guest, Mr. Lim Teng Sherng, Chief Commercial Officer of Advanced AI. All this in this episode of Open for Business.
This portion is brought to you by Globe Business.
Welcome back to Open for Business. Today we have Mr. Lim Teng Sherng, Chief Commercial Officer of Advanced AI, to discuss the future of digital banking in the Philippines. How are you, Mr. Lim?
Yes, I'm good today. Thanks, Isa.
You are in Singapore, and of course, when we talk about Singapore, you're one of the leaders in not only in digital banking, but anything digital. How is Singapore during the pandemic?
I think pandemic, as we know, is a global issue. So in Singapore, I think very much like the rest, we are exposed to obviously the risk associated with the pandemic. And with that, the government will come up with restrictions to ensure that the people are taken care of. But at the same time, I think obviously the reality of it is that there is a constraint around the healthcare system as well. At the same time, you need to obviously keep the economy growing. So it's a balance between restrictions and yet getting things back to as normal as possible. So that's the delicate balance that I believe not just the Singapore government, but I think all the various governments are trying to balance. It's a matter of where do you want to tilt the balance based on the needs of the country, based on the readiness as well. So all these needs to be considered.
Mm-hmm. I think Singapore has one of the best performances in terms of controlling the adverse impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Can you cite some of the best practices that your government, the private sector has done to really mitigate the impact of the COVID-19?
I guess I can't speak on the Singapore government's behalf, but as a citizen and a resident here observing what the government has done, I think there is a balance of a few things. One, I think you need to be proactive. Vaccination, as you said correctly, is a proactive step that you need to take, in terms of how to protect the people. But at the same time, obviously, vaccination is not the only answer. The other part of it that you need to balance is while that is going on, daily lives have to go on. So what are the measures that you need to put in place? And the government in Singapore has quite a substantial reserve. And that allows them perhaps maybe in a more unique position where they can exercise a bit more support, a lot more programs and initiatives to somewhat strike that balance. So in having restrictions, for example, they will have programs to make sure that some of the small businesses will be able to keep going. If they're having restrictions that affect the business, they might have programs to support the salaries of their workers and so on and so forth. So these are things which I see the Singapore government doing very well.
What is the impact of this pandemic to the way we do business and most especially the way we do digital banking? How are we affected and how is doing business, including digital banking, affected with what's happening with the pandemic?
Well, I guess without a doubt, the pandemic has really forced rapid digitization and the rise of remote banking. So, for example, in Philippines, we saw, I think earlier in the year, Union Bank reported a huge rise in the new accounts opening through their online platform. Conversely, you just mentioned about not queuing up and all that. BSP actually reported a decline of 25% in ATM withdrawals since COVID-19 started. So these are statistics that suggest that behavior are changing. And again, due to various restrictions like the ECQ, the enhanced community quarantine, even the senior folks, are compelled to do simple banking transactions online. Obviously, you can't go out, and you have to rely on the online way of doing business, opening accounts, transferring money, paying credit card bills, etc. So, the circumstances of the pandemic has resulted in a big shift in user behavior. That's without a doubt. And a lot of them, after experiencing such a convenience provided, many of them will not go back to the old ways of, in-person branch banking. I think that's inevitable. Amid this backdrop, virtual banks will surge in popularity because they enable 24/7 banking, and in fact, they can onboard customers no matter where they're located. And we all know that BSP issued 6 digital banking licenses this year in the Philippines, and we can expect these digital banks to offer better rates, lower fees, as they do not have the overheads involved in running physical branches. So as the pandemic rages on, there will be strong competition among these banks to attract the tech literate and to attract the unbanked customers. So in summary, I think the pandemic has really accelerated the rise of digital banking. But I also think that digital banks have to think about how to create stickiness with their customers post-pandemic as well.
Wow, that's, your insights and the data that you have provided are really interesting. You also mentioned 6 digital banks, and I think BSP gave permission to that for the six digital banks to operate. But with that number, Mr. Lim, is that high? Is that low? Is that a mid number? And are you expecting, are you anticipating more digital banks to be allowed by the BSP to open because of what's happening with the COVID-19 crisis?
Interesting point you brought up. I'm not in a position to obviously comment on whether BSP will issue more licenses. I believe they have announced that they will stop at 6 for now. I believe the original intent was 7. Whether it was too many, too little, we can look at also the region. In various countries, if I don't recall wrongly, I believe Hong Kong issued 7 or 8 licenses 2 years back. Singapore issued 4 last year. We see a lot of activities in different countries. So you will notice that the number of licenses is not only related to the population of the country, it also relates to the fact of how much financial activity is happening. So in a financial hub like Hong Kong and Singapore, obviously being a financial hub, quite naturally you will see a lot of financial activity, and therefore the number of licenses issued could be as such. In Philippines, as we know, huge population. And according to BSP statistics last year, 71% of the population is unbanked. And I think 58%, if my statistics I remember correctly, can't even apply for bank loans because they don't have the necessary requirements like credit score. So if you look at this, it necessitates the rise of a digital bank. And many of the unbanked are actually from tier 2, tier 3 cities where the physical access of bank branches is difficult. So out of necessity, you would see that this digital bank needs to come in. So I believe that the Philippines government have thought through. These 6 licenses obviously is probably sufficient, in terms of what they're seeing. But let's not forget, that's issuing digital banking licenses. The traditional banks will continue to also offer their services online as well. They see the digital banks coming, they will transform. They will look at their own customer experience. They will look at their offerings as well. So I believe it is going to be complementary and not just the digital banks serving the customers during a pandemic, but the traditional banks will definitely transform and also look at their customer experience as well and provide a lot of services online. So I think in combination, it should be able to address the demand today.
The impact to the small businesses, we know that with the small businesses, they're also the ones engaged with traditional banking because of the smaller resources that they need. And also MSMEs here in the Philippines, is comprised by, we have about, more than 99% belonging to the MSME sector. Is digital banking, better for more flexible, better for the small businesses because it's faster and maybe the things that you will really make them move faster would be more evident in their operations, Mr. Lim?
I think firstly, before I comment, I think I must say that I want to express my respect for the MSMEs in Philippines, for their resilience during this difficult time. It's tough. As you mentioned, from the Philippines Statistics Authority, 99.5% of the business enterprises are, this type of business enterprises. I think they're close to about 953,000 of such MSMEs. And very importantly, they also employ about 63% of the country's workforce. So in talking about digital banking for these small businesses, I think I will think in terms of convenience, in terms of availability of funds. All this will definitely be made a lot more readily available. But I want to steer away from a technology discussion, but really maybe give my 2 cents worth of advice for such small enterprises and businesses. Firstly, in adopting a digital bank, look at the fees and rates that each of these banks that they're considering, right? But do not just simply pick the one with the lowest fee. Now, why do I say that? Because you also, beyond the fees, want to look at what kind of flexibility the digital bank will provide. Because as a small business, you want to be able to stay nimble. You may be faced with all types of unforeseen situations, right? And the reality of it is that the sign-up fees could be one thing, but if you were to make changes when you perhaps even consider closing an account, for example, what are the penalty costs involved? What are the conditions that's involved, right? So it's not about just jumping into it and leveraging on the services, not looking at just picking the one with the lowest fees, but you have to also consider in terms of what kind of commercial flexibility that they have that due to changes that happens in the small business environment. One other advice I would say is that also look at the ease of use. For a start, now consider how easy is it or how cumbersome it is in terms of the onboarding process. Now, we know that when you go on board, you need to go online, apply for the accounts, and so on and so forth. Look at the process. How easy is it to use? Because it will give you a hint in terms of how the user experience may be. Now, as a small enterprise, you don't want to be consuming time trying to figure out technology. You want to have something that's easy to use. You want to make it easier for you to do online transaction, right? So I think that's important to note as well from a MSME's perspective. Final one, I would say, is this. It's going to be extremely tempting, right? All these financial services available. But on a personal basis, I would say this. As digital bank becomes more convenient, more accessible, we need to maintain a discipline of not mixing up your business expenses with our personal expenses. I think that's something that it is really not about what technology to use, but I think a personal discipline in terms of managing that, right? I mean, obviously, there are a lot of businessmen out there that knows this better than me, but I think the temptation would be there when such services becomes readily available.
Wow, that is really a beautiful explanation of the many benefits of digital banking, and as you mentioned, it would really impact on the efficiency also, especially when small businesses go into their business operations. But there would be still issues on security, especially, of course, here in the Philippines, as they move into this environment, into the digital environment where small businesses, MSMEs could, be their first time to go into digitalization. I've been telling this with and the CEOs that I interview here also confirm that this is their first time, or they were forced by the pandemic to embrace digitalization or digital transformation. So what's your take on security issues from hacking, identity theft, things that I think is one of the expertise of advanced AI?
Now, a lot of the security concerns, especially in this area of digital banking or online banking, it's really around digital identity. Now, in the traditional brick and mortar world, you can identify a customer easily over a counter, right? Physical presence, check the ID, look at the person, you know who the person is. In the digital world, how do we tell you are who you are, right? Therein lies the challenge. How do we know who is behind that keyboard? Who is behind that smartphone? So the digital banks are acutely aware of such challenges, and as a result, digital banking technology actually make banking services more secure. I'll give you an example, right? The use of AI. AI is the key enabler for secure digital banking services. Now, today, AI can be deployed in a number of ways. One is really to facilitate customer onboarding, and it can be done through a smartphone, and all this within minutes. For example, you have facial recognition technology. You can verify a customer's identity using selfie. You can do a short video and at the same time with a customer service agent. OCR technology and what we call optical character recognition software can authenticate the customer's identity as well, right? Based on the photos on the national ID. And in Philippines, you have the UMID, the TIN, the SSS IDs, and all that as well, right? So these are things where the OCR technology can help. Now, all this can also be at the same time done over a video that can be recorded and documented from a record perspective. So the AI technologies here have the ability to optimize efficiency, at the same time reducing human error. And great thing about this, we all know, providing the convenience 24/7. So this allows a lot of the considerations around security to be addressed. Now, meanwhile, our anti-fraud software will cut the rise of incidents of fraud, identity theft, and scam. And this obviously has implication on the financial or reputational risk for the banks. And you know what? In juggling all these priorities, the fraudsters and bad actors are not waiting for you to figure this out. So this is where companies like ourselves, we have launched things like a one-stop platform. It brings together a single dashboard that basically covers the full suite of solutions around decisioning, data, analytics, and security. So it is about leveraging technology to orchestrate all this together and to prevent the fraudulent activities. So closer to home, we have worked with CIBI, the credit reporting agency. So this is really to work together, not just using technology, but work with the right partners in trying to combat all these security issues and fraudulent activities. So the combination of AI technology and the relevant data partners would be a key line of defense.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting, Mr. Lim, that you were talking earlier about, two letters, which is AI, artificial intelligence. And again, I think this was fast-tracked, during the pandemic. These concepts are not new to you, but when you speak of AI, what do you think is the role of artificial intelligence in the way we do business? Would it be an essential element in digitalization as well? Are there new technologies on AI that you think will transform further, what's happening with digital banking? Because for now, as you mentioned, we don't open our mobiles anymore using our thumbs, but all we have to do is just put it in front of our faces and our phones and cameras open. So what's the role of AI in, with the many business applications that we now have?
Cesar, you brought up a very good point about technology, and I must admit that while coming from an AI company, I think AI technology itself is a huge enabler, but it cannot be used in isolation. It is not about just AI itself. It is what are you using the AI for in terms of the benefits of it. But at the same time, I mentioned a bit earlier, it is also about what data you use together with AI technology. And especially in the area that we're talking about here, addressing some of these concerns around security, around onboarding, it is not just the AI technology that you use where you gather information, but it is also about what kind of data that you get. If you get the right data-driven insights, you can actually now use it to target customers' needs a lot more efficiently, right? So I think, I'll give an example, right? Using AI, you can look at attributes coming from the database that you have. We mentioned a partner with CIBI. At the same time, the attribute from the particular transaction that you have, what kind of smartphone are you using? What kind of payment history do you have? What kind of other attributes you have from that particular transaction? All these allow you to have a more holistic view of each transaction, but also of the customer profile. So this in turn will really help you to address a lot of the issues I talked about, not only just security, more importantly, security, the flip side of it is about better customer experience. So if you use AI in the right way, harness it, you can actually tailor a lot more better solutions. And in the area of digital banking that we're talking about, you can actually start to build a credit profile, for example, of your customers. And then you can actually extend tailored and more suitable microfinancing solutions, for example, right? Whether it's a small loan, whether it's a micro insurance, these are things where how AI can be used. So AI by itself is a means, it's a technology, it's an enabler. But coupled with the right set of data partners, data sets that you have, the application of it, huge potential.
I also heard in one of the technology conferences, AI is as good as the data that you will put in it. Okay. So, but my question, another question, Mr. Lim, is you mentioned about your partners here in the Philippines, and I think that's a key element also of having good partnerships, especially in digital banking here in the Philippines, because that's where people are going. That's where the small businesses and their enterprise are going to really, focus on digital transformation. What specific services do you have with your partners here in the Philippines, and what do you think? What's your outlook in the digital banking industry here in the Philippines?
I think specific to the Philippine situation itself, definitely we are helping many clients from different organizations. It could well be in the banking sector that we talk about, both the traditional banks, the brick and mortar banks. We have the digital banks as well. It could be payment vendors. It could be e-commerce companies. It could be someone in the crypto industry. Basically, the way we apply this really applies across all types of industry. As long as you need to identify customers that's coming on board, where you need verification, you need onboarding, you need ways to establish that your new account openings are really trusted. And this gives the trust to the people opening the accounts as well, right? You're working with a very secure organization. So I think, especially in the Philippines, we are working with local partners and global and regional partners to ensure that our technology, coupled with the relevant data, applies to the Philippine situation. So that's one aspect of the questions you have just asked. Now, in terms of the overall outlook, well, I guess I would look at it this way. The pandemic has accelerated digital adoption, but it is due to the circumstances that you have to use digital platforms, and not because you want to use it. So, but because of the circumstance, now more and more people are getting used to it, and we are all creatures of habit. And so digital become a way of life. So I think if you end up looking at it in totality and coupled with the government initiatives, and on that note, we know that BSP's digital payments transformation roadmap, right, for the next few years, and its drive is towards a cash-like economy. And there are two outcomes, as we all know, right, for that particular roadmap. One is around, by 2023, BSP hopes to convert about 50% of the retail payments into digital form. And also the other bigger objective, I would say, would be to expand the financially included to 70% of the Filipino adults by onboarding them to the formal financial system, right, to the use of payment, transactions, and all that online. And interestingly, while that is BSP's objective, Philippines actually have the lowest banking penetration in Southeast Asia. So that's where I think the rise of the digital bank becomes extremely key in trying to achieve that objective. Now, it also means that there is a huge customer base, especially in the Philippines, for the digital bank to target, which is around 51 million unbanked adult population. So, digital banks, along with the brick and mortar banks, will be obviously competing hard to win over this market. So, but this is not just an end by itself. The digital banks, to be really successful, needs to be part of a larger digital ecosystem. And that includes the e-commerce platforms, includes online shops, supply chain, fintech lending, for example, right? This is really where the bank is not only at the center of a system, but they need to be looking at what they are contributing to a larger ecosystem. And I think that Philippines is in a great position, right? And with the government's strong drive towards digitization, the investment in infrastructure, this will really drive financial inclusion. So I think the outlook looks great. Due to the ongoing pandemic, I think the outlook looks very bright for digital banks. And I maintain this. The long-term outlook for digital bank is really about its ability to differentiate itself and staying relevant post-pandemic. It must be really able to leverage on the customer base they've built, understand the needs of this customer, and somewhat find services and offerings that stay relevant in order to retain their customers in the long term beyond the pandemic, right? I think that will really allow the outlook to be sustainable as well, in the digitization effort. So that's something I'm really looking forward to, right? The complete digitization and successful digitization in Philippines in a few years' time. Looking forward to that.
Wow, that's really a rosy picture of what you see in digital banking here in the Philippines. You mentioned several concepts which are also very interesting that we think would be crucial in terms of its contribution to the economic development, which is financial inclusion. And you mentioned about this data about 51 or 52 million Filipinos who are unbanked. So my question is, what's the competition between the traditional banking and digital banking? Because I think here in the Philippines, there are established brick and mortar banks, and with the involvement also of fintech. With fintech, it's easy now to open an e-wallet, a digital wallet. So, some of the banks are doing that, but some of the fintech companies or some of the technopreneurs are also doing it, providing services, creating services. And you talk about this ecosystem where everyone's really connected and involved. But somehow, will this create a negative dent on the traditional banking here in the Philippines? Are you looking at a shift, maybe in terms of competition, or a shift in the players, or would the established banks continue to dominate the industry because of their aggressiveness and maybe because of their foresight, on what's going to happen in the future? Your thoughts on this, Mr. Lim?
Philippines history probably better than me, but if I don't recall wrongly, the first traditional bank in Philippines started in the 1850s, right? So they've been around for a long time. And over the years, they have transformed, from the traditional paper-based legacy system. They have obviously launched, automated machines over the years, point-of-sale machines as well. So banks have been constantly looking for ways to improve their services, to improve their offerings. So facing a new digital challenge is something which I think the traditional banks have been anticipating. So it didn't come as a surprise. And if you think about it, online banking had been around for a while as well. But digital banking is maybe taking a step beyond that. It has evolved to the point where a digital bank does not have branches. It provides everything end-to-end on the digital platform. That's the difference between perhaps online banking versus digital banking. A traditional bank would have done already a lot of online banking in the past, and for them to evolve further is a natural evolution to them. The hurdles for them to move from that into a space to compete against the digital bank is not a huge step, because a lot of them, the big banks, the traditional brick and mortar, had already had foundations in online banking. Now, what more to think about is this. Incumbent banks have the edge in terms of brand equity. They have the reputation, right? I mentioned about the banks being around for a long time. And what they also have is existing customer data. The new banks are trying to acquire a customer, whereas the traditional banks already have a customer database. So the challenge is for the traditional banks to fundamentally redesign the entire banking experience around the customer and rethink their customer acquisition strategy. And having said all this as well, physical bank branches, let's not think it will go away immediately. Yes, number of branches may have closed globally. It is a trend that we see, but the bank branches will still act as an important touch point to build customer trust, to build relationship. a lot of the high-value, complex transactions, it could be mortgages, investment, retirement planning. It's not something that you can simply do on the digital front. There are some things that you want to have that personal experience in the branch as well. So that is something that the brick and mortar bank will always have that advantage. So in summary, I think the incumbent banks needs to act now, build upon their online platform. If not, they will actually be risking being left behind by the hungrier startups, as you mentioned. Because the startups are very customer-centric, very customer-focused, and they are using technology very smartly to acquire their customers and to know their customers. So that's the part which the brick and mortar bank will have to really keep up, especially with the adoption of technology. So it will not be business as usual. Competition will heat up in the digital space.
So, Mr. Lim, being at physically right at the center of a very, highly digital environment, and being at the forefront of all these, including artificial intelligence, what are the changes in the consumer behavior, both maybe from the individual point of view and also on the enterprise level? During the pandemic, are there significant changes in terms of consumer behavior that you have seen, and what are the new technologies that you are looking at, where you would continue to exploit or explore in terms of providing, as you said, a better banking experience, not only for Filipinos, but also other members of the community in Asia?
I think in terms of overall behavior, I've mentioned quite a few of those earlier on. I think digital adoption, it was out of necessity. It wasn't because of the fact that technology were coming in and attracting users on it, but out of circumstances, out of restriction, people have to use technology. But I think even way before the pandemic, there were already a lot of things that were driving towards this behavior anyway. One thing we know in terms of use of smartphones have increased tremendously. Obviously, in terms of the internet infrastructure as well. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just the pandemic. It was a catalyst and driver to have actually increased digital adoption. But I think the consumer behavior was already moving towards a digital space for a while with the use of smartphones and all that. So the pandemic is really one that just kickstarted even more, right? In terms of the shift. In terms of enterprises, I think the main challenge I've seen is also related to that change in behavior from a user and consumer perspective. Because more are now coming onto the digital platform. In the past, if you are adopting a wait and see attitude, if in the past you were wondering if I should go online, I should go digital, how big should I go? And you have been holding back, the circumstances now will necessitate you to rethink that strategy and to accelerate the digital transformation. Mm-hmm. And so the digital transformation is not only about technology, because it requires a fundamental shift in mindset as well. Within each of the organization, you need to build a digital culture, a digital mindset. It is not simply putting things online. How do you operate behind the scene? Because the demand of a online business, a digital business is different. Because it provides convenience and availability, but it also means that from an operational perspective, you need to be ready for that. If there are immediate demands, because it's now an online order, for example, is your back end ready to take that order and provide the level of service that is expected on an online business? Because I think the online business, consumer behavior, enterprise behavior is changing, but the level of expectation has also definitely rise a lot as well. So I think this is really my view of how the overall landscape is evolving. And I think the only slight thing I would advise is this: while planning for all this transformation, back to what I said earlier, do not look at being pandemic ready only. Look at decisions, investment, strategy that is also post-pandemic ready. I think pandemic, obviously all of us wish it will go away sooner than later. It will go away. But in the whole new world, you don't want a sudden spike in digital activities only for you to be caught off guard later on, where you fail to address loyalty issues, customer retention issues. These are things you must really think about in the longer term while doing the transformation.
Wow, those are excellent tips also for small businesses who want to use digital banking for their businesses. Not only digital banking, but embracing or transforming your organization towards the digital space. I only have one question left, and that is, how expensive is this digitalization? How expensive is AI? Or is it really, something, that will require small businesses to change their technology platform? Or can small businesses just, find partners with a lot of technology companies? And I also believe that there are some organizations who offer subscriptions or free softwares out there. How is the investment in terms of digitalization, and how do you think will this financial and operational considerations impact on the business of our MSMEs?
I sincerely believe that the various suppliers of such technology have considered that. While on one hand, we will target the large enterprises, which obviously will have the budget to spend, we are also very conscious that the mass market would obviously like to adopt digital innovations as well. And so from a commercial perspective, we will have various kinds of offering. And as you mentioned, whether it's a subscription-based, whether it is a software as a service kind of packages and offerings, this allow you to build a more cloud-based infrastructure, cloud-based approach towards some of this so-called investment. And the great thing about this is it allows you to scale as and when your businesses scale. So it is not a case of in the past where you have to build all these things in-house. Then the point you mentioned earlier on about investment, all those things comes in. But when you build a more cloud-based, cloud-centric kind of strategy and approach, you actually does a few things. One, obviously, as I mentioned, from an investment perspective, you can scale accordingly and invest as your business go up or down. But at the same time, it also allows you to continue to leverage on the latest technology, because a cloud-based technology and approach basically means that the supplier of this technology will continue to innovate what happens behind the scene in their cloud environment and infrastructure and setup. They will keep up in terms of innovation. They will keep on refining their offerings as well. So when you are buying something from one of these, SaaS players and all that, you are actually growing with them technologically as well. So I think that's many advantages for businesses to adopt this approach. So I think don't be in a hurry to jump in and invest things and buying them in-house. But I think there are many providers out there, including ourselves, having the ability to provide you a cloud-based solution, which allows you to really be a lot more agile and nimble.
Wow. That's really, this interview is really insightful, because a lot of small businesses really are embracing digital banking. Your final words, Mr. Lim, on for MSMEs, for small businesses who, despite the pandemic, continue to thrive and remain open for business.
Well, I wouldn't dare to say it's my advice, because a lot of the businessmen out there have really been successful over the years. I think what I would say, my 2 cents worth, as I mentioned earlier, the resilience that you have helped you ride through this particular pandemic. I think that resilience is what you will continue to need. I think coupled that resilience with a more open-minded view of the digital world, more open-minded in terms of upcoming innovation, and consider what are the ways for you to couple your baseline, your foundation, together with ways to really expand the horizons of your business. I think putting all this together, that's really the key to long-term survival.
Wow, that's a great way to end this conversation. Mr. Lim Teng Sherng, Chief Commercial Officer of Advanced AI. Open for Business will be back. Stay with us.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
This portion is brought to you by SMC Global Power.
Welcome back to Open for Business. I am Las Vegas correspondent Randy Bernardino, and here are the trending business news around the world. BSP limits Philippine digital banks to 6. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas said it will limit the country's digital bank licenses to 6 after other applicants failed to submit the necessary documents to secure the last spot. During a virtual forum organized by the Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines, or FINEX, BSP Governor Benjamin Diokno said the central bank decided to cap the digital banks at 6 to closely monitor the industry moving forward. The 6 digital banks that secured BSP approval to operate in the country are GoTime of Robinsons Bank Corp, Maya Bank of PayMaya, Overseas Filipino Bank or OF Bank, Tonic Bank of Singapore, Unibank of Singapore, and Union Digital of the Union Bank of the Philippines. Diokno noted that digital banks are only required to have one headquarters and do not need to have branches, making their operating costs lower and enabling them to offer higher interest rates. US economy adds 194,000 jobs in September. The United States added 194,000 jobs last month, and the unemployment rate fell to 4.8%, showing a mixed result as the world's largest economy recovers from the pandemic. Fewer jobs were gained than expected, but the unemployment rate dropped by more than analysts' prediction. The Labor Department noted employment rose in the leisure and hospitality sector, but declined in public education. Hiring was overall much weaker than the 366,000 positions added in August, and may indicate that the COVID-19 Delta variant made businesses hesitant and held back employment. While the economy has created 17.4 million jobs since the COVID-19 downturn, the data showed the United States is still short 5 million positions it had before the pandemic, with job growth averaging 561,000 per month in 2021. Pandora Papers expose leaders' offshore millions. More than a dozen heads of state have used offshore tax havens to hide assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars, according to a far-reaching new investigation by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, or ICIJ. The so-called Pandora Papers investigation, involving some 600 journalists from the media, is based on the leak of some 11.9 million documents from 14 financial service companies around the world. Some 35 current and former leaders are featured in the latest documents analyzed by the ICIJ, facing allegations ranging from corruption to money laundering and global tax avoidance. In most countries, it is not illegal to have assets offshore or to use shell companies to do business across national borders. But such revelations are no less of an embarrassment for leaders who have campaigned publicly against tax avoidance and corruption or advocated austerity measures at home. And now for our job hunting tips. Every week, we will provide you with tips for first-time job seekers, for those wanting to advance in their careers, or even those wanting to start fresh and change professions. Today's tip: research companies. As you find job listings that interest you, research the hiring companies before applying. This can provide you with information about their company culture, benefits and salary range, products and services, and even the work environment. Your research will tell you whether you want to or are qualified to work for that company. It also gives you valuable information you can reference in your cover letter or interview. Those are our job hunting tips. Now for our millennial news with correspondent Jasmine Agustin.
Millennials nowadays place a higher emphasis on work-life balance than on advancement in their careers. They value experiences over material possessions. As a result of this attitude to pleasure and success, they are more willing to take chances by trying new things and meeting new people. On today's Open for Business, pag-uusapan natin why money isn't everything when it comes to success and why success is determined by the individual and his or her life goals. Here are 5 rules to follow in order to succeed. First is have a goal in your mind for your life. Creating a vision for your life provides you a sense of direction. You must have a target, a clear aim toward which all of your efforts should be directed. Second is be intentional. Being intentional is being clear about your goals from the start. Whatever you do in life, do it because that's what you mean to do. Third is mind and actions must be disciplined. Disciplining your mind and actions are life's method of removing out the pretenders. The universe isn't going to hand you the life you want just because you think you are special. Be disciplined hard to earn it. Fourth is quality triumphs quantity. Find strategies to gradually improve the quality of your reality without putting yourself in risk. There are numerous aspects to this that do not necessitate a monetary input, and your entire life can alter for the better. Lastly, success is the result of a series of little actions taken on a regular basis. It's the small things you do on a daily basis that add up to significant outcomes. Take measured risks where the reward is worth it, and be brave in your life. We discovered that money isn't a magic cure-all for everything that ails us. If you want to succeed, you must follow these guidelines and your fate will be in your hands. Para sa Open for Business, Ako po, si Jasmine Agustin.
This portion is brought to you by SMC Global Power.
Kwentuhang bubusugin sa impormasyon ang iyong umaga.
Love scam.
Ang saklap naman nun, tinakuhan ka ng
400. Malaking pera yun, ha?
Bumili ako Bluma yan. Dumating,
Overseas.
excited ako.
Oh.
Pinunla akong ganun. Ako, talahin mo.
Tala.
Ating siyasatin, pinakamaiinit na news.
Ano po ang inyong posisyon tungkol po dito sa 13th month pay?
Gumawa ng pasilidad para makautang yung mga gusto magbayad na walang pambayad.
Kukuha tayo ng makakausap tungkol sa SIM swap na scam.
Yung SIM swap, yung one-time PIN natin na naka-register sa bank, pinapadala ho yan sa cellphone natin. Kaya kailangan natin yung SIM swap.
Kapag nawalan po ng kumpiyansa ang taong bayan sa digital banking system, napakalaking problema po niyan.
Mga bagong kaalamang hindi mo dapat palampasin. Araw sa Pilipinas noon.
Ang kinikilalang kauna-unahang national anthem ng Pilipinas.
Alamin saan pinanggalingan ito.
Ang ilang mga manggagawa ay agad-agad nang nakapila para mag-time out sa trabaho bago pa man tumunog ang sirena. Kaya dito nagsimula na masabihan na ang mga bulakbol ay mabilis pa sa alas 4.
ASPN. Ano sa palagay nyo? Kasama si Ali Soto at Pat P. Daza.
Marami talagang nangangamba na baka hindi na po i-entertain ng mga private hospitals ang PhilHealth nila. Ano po ang epekto nito sa amin po ng mga pasyente?
Kung sakali man po matuloy yan, na hindi na mag-renew. Ngayon pa lang po ay humihingi na kami ng paumanhin.
Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 8 ng umaga. Simulcast sa Net25, DZEC, Radyo Aguila 1062 AM. Eagle FM 95.5, Facebook at YouTube.
400,000 daw nakahabol pagpaparehistro. Kasi naghintay ng last minute.
O yung mga Pilipino, palitan na natin yung ugali natin na yan na last minute.
ASPN. Ano sa palagay nyo?
Open for Business is back and our term of the week is from Investopedia. Our term of the week is investment. An investment is an asset or item acquired with a goal of generating income or appreciation. Appreciation refers to an increase in the value of an asset over time. When an individual purchases a good as an investment, the intent is not to consume the good, but rather to use it in the future to create wealth. The coronavirus has accelerated the shift to digital banking. With people avoiding in-person interactions, less customers are visiting physical banks and are transacting more online. The boom in e-commerce has allowed more Filipinos to accept digital banking as convenient and easy. Now is the perfect time to open up a bank account to keep your money safe. With that, our quote of the week is from the famous author John Maxwell. He said, "A budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went." Maraming salamat sa inyong panonood ng Open for Business. Thank you to our guest, Mr. Lim Teng Sherng, and our correspondents, Randy Bernardino and Jasmine Agustin. Samahan ninyo kaming muli sa Open for Business sa susunod na linggo. Learn more insights from CEOs, thought leaders, industry experts, and SMEs promoting business development in the Philippines. Keeping you informed and open for business. Be ahead of the curve from vision to action. Panoorin din ang programang OFB sa Facebook at YouTube. Mag-like at mag-subscribe sa aming social media at Net25 TV. Para sa Open for Business,